All right. I wanted to ask why you thought Trump v. U.S. was just completely made up.
Because there's nowhere in the Constitution that they didn't actually derive it from the Constitution, like at all. They just
Uh,
it was derived from the idea that it could be bad for the president to be criminally liable. It could cause them to think too hard about what they're gonna do.
Here, I'll try and work that out for a second so I can understand what you're saying. Do you think the president can be criminally prosecuted for exercising his core constitutional powers?
Rephrase that. Do I think he can that the president could be post Trump v. United States, or like should they be able to be?
Can they be
Well,
prosecuted?
no,
Why not? It's not in the Constitution.
because of the decision in Trump v. U.S.
Well, before ignore that. Just
Okay,
assume it
prior.
doesn't exist. Yeah.
Um, like but prior, I think that they if how do I phrase this? Had if they used their they wouldn't be being prosecuted for the usage of the power. It would be the motivations for the usage of the power and then why you did it. For instance, the president has one of the core powers of the presidency is pardons. But pre-Trump v. U.S., I would have said that if you were caught and if it could be proven that you were issuing pardons in exchange for monetary bribes, then you should be able to be pardoned under public corruption statutes. Now that you can't be.
Can you say that one more time? I'm sorry, I got confused by what you said.
So, for instance, one of the core powers of the president is the pardon power. The pardon power can be used in loads of different ways. Now, it doesn't matter how you use it. It's just like it doesn't matter because the pardon power is invoked. It's just you're not going to be able to prosecute anything having to do with it. Pre Trump v. US, I would have said that if you were caught and if it could be proven that you were exchanging presidential pardons um, in exchange for like a monetary bribe. You know, there was people sitting in white collar prison somewhere, and they're like, "Yo, I'll give you $1 million if you pardon me," and you were pardoning those people. I would say that you should be able to be prosecuted under a public corruption statute for bribery. But now, because of Trump v. U.S., even if that was the exact situation, even if exactly that was happening, you're shit out of luck. You can't do anything about it.
Well, I would agree with you, but there's a very explicit part of the Constitution that also prohibits, I think it's bribery, is it treason and other, it's the impeachment clause where it prohibits bribery, treason, and that one small thing, misdemeanors and small.
Yep. But that's the impeachment clause, and impeachment's not a conviction. I don't necessarily think it's
Yeah.
justifiable to let a president, even if you are able to impeach and convict and remove a president, I don't think that that's enough if they're doing something that egregious. If you got elected to office and you're using the power that the American people entrusted in you to make yourself rich by taking bribes for pardons, I don't think it's enough, in my opinion at least. I don't think it would be enough to just say, well, he's out of office now. I want you to face punishment, true punishment, like jail time punishment. And so, while yes, you could be impeached still, even with the Trump unit, I mean, the SCOTUS wouldn't have any ability to regulate impeachments. Yes, you could still be impeached. I don't think that's enough. But because of Trump v. US, even if you were doing something that egregious, you could be impeached, but you're not getting prosecuted. And I would want that person prosecuted.
You could still be prosecuted after you leave office.
No,
You can.
no.
You can read the Federalist Papers. I think maybe I read the wrong thing. You're prosecuted afterwards. Impeachment and removal from office only removes you
Yeah,
from office and prohibits you from holding future office.
I understand. What you're talking about right now is
Prosecuted
I'm
afterwards.
saying because of Trump v. US, because of that decision, you would not be able to be prosecuted for those actions because they would be considered the pardon power is considered core presidential powers. So a court could not probe the motivations behind you using it. If you were Trump, let's say, I'll make the fake scenario. I say fake scenario, but I don't really believe this to be that fake in light of the Trump meme coin. But let's say it was the case that Trump was taking pardons, or sorry, was taking bribes, was taking money from people in exchange for pardoning them. Let's say that was going on. And it came out to the public, and Congress impeached him for it. He was impeached and convicted, removed from office. No prosecutor could come along afterwards and press bribery charges against him because you wouldn't be able to use any evidence in association with the pardon power. You wouldn't be able to inquiry why he was issuing those pardons. SCOTUS already ruled that was ultimately the holding in Trump v. US is not only can you not prosecute people for their usage of core presidential powers, you can't even probe into them the motivations behind the usage. You can't even say like, okay,
Wait a minute.
why were you doing it?
The official act is the pardon, not the taking the bribe.
Yes, but you can't probe. That's what I'm saying. You cannot probe into the reason the pardon was given. So you could say that you could look and you could point to say like, look, he got money. But then eventually, ultimately, in a court of law, you're going to have to prove, okay, you're going to have to connect those two things. You're going to have to say, okay, look, we see the money coming into your bank account, but why? What was given to prove bribery? To prove the statute, the way our bribery statutes are written, to prove it, there would have to be an exchange. But the part you couldn't bring up in court, the part you could not probe in a court, is why that pardon was given. You could say, look, I see money coming into your bank account, but you can't then use that pardon given as evidence because it was an official act.
Where's that in the decision? I don't think I remember
That's
that.
what the entire decision was about, the inability to probe official acts. That is exactly why the fucking Jesus Christ, the January 6th case was thrown out, was because of Trump v. US, because now the prosecutors in that case couldn't use evidence related to official acts. For instance, one of the biggest pieces of evidence against Trump was his conversations between him and his deputy attorney generals. Like they had those conversations, and that was a huge piece of evidence that his actions were corrupt.
Well, and even in that case, when the case got all the way up to the Supreme Court, it was a vacate and remand, so it went back to the lower to the DC Circuit, so they could
For them to determine it was remanded for them to determine if they could still continue the case without using evidence that was obtained, like without those official actions. And it went down, and Jack Smith just was like, I can't do this shit. I'm not gonna be able to prove this without that evidence.
Well, it was dismissed because there was a Trump won the election and he just left. And
because there was a huge gap, not a huge gap. There was enough of a gap of time for Jack Smith to make a decision on whether or not he wanted to continue, but he wasn't. He said he wasn't going to keep going. At that point, so much of his evidence got yoinked by that decision.
He could just official acts couldn't be prosecuted, or you can,
or because you couldn't probe the reasons behind them. So when like I said, a humongous part of his evidence was his conversations with his deputy AG. At that point, once that ruling comes down, okay, now I can't even use these conversations because it is a core power of the president to communicate with his attorney general, with his underlings, right? So I can't use any of this as evidence. So he wasn't going to move forward with that case regardless.
Do you think that was a good idea? Not the latter part, just you can't use a president's official acts to probe as to whether or not to probe their motivation for doing something.
Like their conversations with people under them?
Yeah.
No. It's a terrible idea.
No, what? You don't think they can be prosecuted, or you do think they can?
You said you think that was a good idea. I think that whole decision was a horrible idea.
Okay.
So I bet you Roberts regrets that shit right about now.
I don't think he does.
Well, I mean, he came out yesterday saying that the rule of law in America is severely under threat. And I feel no sympathy for him in that moment when he comes out and he says like the rule of law is we're under huge threat right now. I don't feel any sympathy for him making that statement because the rule of law is under threat. It's your fault. Fuck you. Shut up.
Oh, those seem to be. If he thought something else was going to happen, I still think he would have thought the decision was correct if Trump wasn't doing all that stuff. But just looking through the last section, I'm on Article 1, Section 3 on the last paragraph, where it talks about like what happens when you're removed from office. And it says, judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than removal from office, and said, disqualification to hold or enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States, but the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. Yeah. So that can happen, but I don't know where you get from the decision that they can't, like a president taking a bribe in exchange for a pardon, they can be punished for taking the bribe after they leave office.
It's the evidentiary standards. It's not that you couldn't press the charges. If it were the case, let's say the same scenario that I presented earlier, right, with Trump taking bribes, right? If it were the case that came public and he was impeached and removed, it's not that no one could press charges; it's that no one would, because you definitionally speaking, you cannot meet the evidentiary requirement. Because when you press that charge and you go to court, what you will have to prove is you will have to prove the link between the money he received and the action he took. and you can't look into the motivations. You statutory or not statutorily now, but because of the holding in Trump v. US, you now cannot probe the motivation behind an official act. You could not ask the question, okay, I see you issued a pardon on this date to this person. Why did you do that? You can't ask that question. You can't probe that.
Does that happen because of the Constitution or because of that opinion
What
alone?
happens? It's because of Trump v. US. It's the same. It's literally a 1-to-1 comparison. I don't know how to make this more clear. It is a 1-to-1 between the Trump v. US case itself, what was going on in that case, and the holding of the result of the case. The reason that was even like the reason that was decided is because a lot of the evidence Jack Smith was using was based on things that were considered to be official acts, such as communicating with your underlings, the deputy AG and stuff like that, as I mentioned. And that was SCOTUS saying this can't be probed. You can't even look at this. You can't use it as evidence. You can't look into it. You cannot ask the motivation behind any of it. It's official. You can't touch it. Fuck you. Get away. And so now that would be the case. If it were the case that he was taking bribes, that's exactly what would happen now. Now you're not going to be able to prove the elements of bribery anymore. You can't do it because you cannot ascertain the motivation behind the pardon.
Yeah, I see how you're getting to that, but I still think it would be the same if that decision wasn't uh, rendered, because I still feel like you can't really go into why a president is taking an official action because it's purely political sometimes.
Well, pre that decision, you would just charge Trump. If that say Trump U.S. was never decided, that case didn't exist. It was never decided. You would just charge Trump with bribery, drag him into the courtroom. You'd assume. I assume in this case you would, if you're a good prosecutor, or if a good investigation was done, you would have the financial transaction statements, right? You'd be able to see the money coming into him, and then all you'd have to do to prove the other element is put the person who received the pardon on the stand, and just say why did Trump pardon you? And they would say because I paid him $1 million. Boom, done. You got him. But now
Would
that
that be
can't happen.
would that be after office or if he's president?
Well, after being impeached, because you, generally speaking, you would impeach the person, remove him from office, and then you charge him.
Okay. So you do believe that a president couldn't be charged with a crime when they're saying
Yeah,
that.
you could still charge Trump if Trump were to be impeached and removed. You could charge him you could throw every fucking crime in the
Oh,
entire book at him. You could charge him with a shitload of stuff. You're just not gonna be able to prove any of it because the evidence you would need is all gonna be protected under the Trump U.S. decision.
oh, when he's in office though.
Well, for when he's in office, I think the DOJ already has they already have. We don't really even need to get into the legal basis of whether or not you could, because the DOJ is already they stand really firm on the idea that we would never that's by like DOJ official rules. You cannot do that. You can't charge the sitting president with shit.
To me, that seems as arbitrary as saying that the Trump decision just came out of nowhere. It's like the DOJ policy saying that you can't prosecute a sitting
Well,
president.
the Trump the U.S. decision wasn't never said that you couldn't charge a sitting president. It's not what they were. That's not what the ruling was.
Yeah, I understand, but I'm saying it's as arbitrary as the Trump v. U.S. decision, the DOJ policy.
Well, the DOJ policy is because it would just be a bad look. So that's their official like internal policy. Is like we would never do something like that because it would be a fucking horrible look. We're not going to do it. That would be bad. We're just going to stay away from all that. The reason I say the Supreme Court decision was pulled out of nowhere is because they pulled it out of they didn't get it. Like for instance, when we talk about some like let's use JGG versus Trump because I was just talking about that case with the last guy. The holding in that case was pulled directly. They yoinked it directly from historical sources. They pulled it from the Ludecky decision. They pulled it from the 14th Amendment itself. Like every single claim they make in that ruling, it's a pretty short opinion, but every claim made you can cite directly back to something historical. With Trump v. U.S., they just repeatedly cite back to. I think they had their sources were like one Federalist paper that sort of was like in the ballpark of their argument, but it ultimately like wasn't exact. It wasn't like on point. And then they cited to the Nixon case like a million times. Like, well, because we already ruled the president can't be held civilly liable for anything, so we should say that he can't be held criminally liable either. Which my rebuttal to that argument would be there's a huge difference in the public interest between civil suits and criminal prosecution.
I think the DOJ policy. Well, I'm gonna come back for a second. The DOJ policy came about because the DOJ under Mises in like the 1980s said that the separation of powers requires that the DOJ be completely beholden to the president, and they can't really prosecute the president because they're under the executive branch, and Usually the DOJ will only not defend a statute for two reasons. One, it takes away the powers of the president, or two, there's no justifiable reason that could, there's no justifiable purpose for the law, like at all.
Well,
So,
that's kind of the same point I was making. Like when I said like the reason they wouldn't do it is
oh
because it
yeah,
would be a bad look. Because ultimately, what you would have to require, or what would be required for you, is if say you were the attorney general, for you to charge the president with something, you would have to. Again, I mean, like you said, you're directly under the president. You'd have to be going against, because obviously the president's not going to be like, yes, charge me. That's not going to be happening. Um, so you'd have to be going directly against them, which like, is why I say like it would be a fucking horrible look. Holy shit, it'd be the worst look.
to me, it's not like a horrible look. It's just like it's completely precluded by the Constitution under Article 3, where it says you have to have a case or a controversy. And if Article 2 says that the president has the executive power, then there's no case or controversy where the attorney general is prosecuting the president. The president could just tell him to stop. There's no controversy there. And there's no case there.
That's what I'm saying. The president could. You're right. The president could just tell them to stop. Like they could say, no, don't prosecute me. That's where so necessarily, because the president can order you to not prosecute them, necessarily what would be required is for you to ignore the orders of your direct superior. That's where it's like we get into whole fucking horrible territory there. So that's what I'm saying. We're agreeing. We're just saying it different ways.
Yeah.
Like
Well,
that'd
that
be
seems
super bad. No one wants that. Nobody wants that. Like we don't want the
that
fucking
seems
AG fighting the president. That's bad.
well to me that too seems as much fiction as Trump v. U.S., where it says that you can't really prosecute a president for their official acts.
Um. Okay. That's not the case. But I would also argue that even if let's say they were both just as made up. Let's say the DOJ policy and the decision in Trump v. US was just as made up. Like they were both just made up from fucking nothing, and it was just the generally the way that the feelings of the people involved in making those policies and decisions. Um, you wouldn't weigh those things the same. I don't put the same amount of weight into a Department of Justice internal policy as I do a Supreme Court decision. That would be unhinged for you to weight those two things the same way.
I don't I don't get which one is weighed more.
The Supreme Court decision that SCOTUS, like a DOJ policy, could be any AG or any president could just fucking turn that, like could just get rid of that policy if they wanted to at the snap of a finger. That could just be gone tomorrow. But SCOTUS precedent is binding law, so that has way more weight. What the Supreme Court rules has way more weight than what the DOJ has for their internal policies, because they could just be changed, like snap, boom, gone.
Okay, I kind of agree with that. But I still don't see why you think Trump v. US was a bad decision.
Well, because okay, I'll explain one more time. I'll do it slow. The reason I think it's a bad decision, for one, because the consequences are not good, very not good. Um, I guess I'll give you three reasons. One, very not good consequences. Now you can not theoretically, you could very easily have a president that does fucking disgustingly illegal shit and just walk away unharmed, unfazed. So that is not good. Secondly, it almost directly contradicts what the purpose of the founding of our country was. If you can sit there in good faith and tell me that you think the founders, the framers of the Constitution, would have wanted a president that is immune from prosecutions for corruption shit, no, they would be very against that. And then three, because they didn't actually derive, when the Supreme Court comes to a decision, it's supposed to be derived from the Constitution. They just didn't in this case. They pulled it out of a fucking hat.
Okay.
Like you don't have to be impeached for a crime. Ultimately, Congress can impeach you for whatever the fuck they want to.
I think it's a bit limited. I think the standard that there's that one phrase, small crimes and misdemeanors, small offenses and misdemeanors. What was it? Uh,
So I'll phrase it like this: when it comes to something like impeachment, SCOTUS would for let's say Congress wanted to impeach the president for something that was technically not illegal, not a crime in any way, shape, or form. It wasn't a fucking felony, wasn't a misdemeanor, it was nothing. Not illegal, but it was seen as very bad public image. Maybe it was just a horrible PR thing, and it made him look horrible, and it made America look bad, and so they wanted to impeach him for that. And it was the case that people were like, you can't use the impeachment power this way. That impeachment is one of those things that I don't think SCOTUS would go near with a 10-foot pole. So you would ultimately, if they wanted to impeach him, they would.
There was a
And
president.
SCOTUS wouldn't do dick about it.
There
This
was a
SCOTUS,
president
this SCOTUS.
before Lincoln that was almost impeached for overusing the pardon power. I'm trying to think. I'm not sure it was Jackson.
I mean, yeah, but that could be the case. That's kind of, yeah. You're making my point. Yeah, like overusing the pardon power is not a fucking crime at all. But yeah, just like it looks corrupt, it looks bad, right? So Congress can just impeach you, and SCOTUS isn't going to go anywhere near that. They're just going to claim it's a political question. They're not going to touch it, and then boom, it'll happen if Congress wants it to happen.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not sure it would even get there in the first place. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is hard to impeach someone. You have to have like huge support for it. Theoretically, like this is a fantasy. Like this would never happen. I just don't I don't see this happening, right? But let's say it were the case that like Republicans won 100% of the House and 100% of the Senate. So like everyone in Congress was Republican, and then a Democrat president got elected. They could just impeach him on day one for nothing, and fucking SCOTUS isn't going anywhere near that. They're gonna be like, nope, political question. We're not ruling. Go ahead, do it.
I feel like you still have to have like meat on the bones when it comes to like.
So then my question to you, I understand you feel that way, and I know that you feel that way, and I know why you feel that way. But then you tell me what would be done about it, because the answer is nothing would be done about it.
The phrase is high crimes and misdemeanors.
Listen, don't cite the Constitution at me, because I understand, and that's what I'm saying. I get why you feel that way, because you're pulling it from the text of the Constitution. I'm saying who would stop them from doing it? If Congress all came together on day one of a Democratic, president's presidency and said we're impeaching you, and it because the House and the Senate were 100% Republican, it went through like immediately. Who would stop them? What's the mechanism by which someone would interject and stop that? Normally, it would be SCOTUS coming in and saying you can't do that, but I'm telling you, this Supreme Court composition wouldn't go anywhere fucking near that case, because it's very much a political question, and this SCOTUS defers on political questions like every single time. They're like, nope, not touching it. Fuck you.
Mm. I see the point you're making.
Yeah. So I'm not saying constitutionally it would be like even a thing that would like should be able to happen constitutionally speaking, but it would happen and no one would do anything about it.
It'll probably never happen ever.
No, because for that hypothetical I laid out, you would need 100%. You'd need one party to have 100% of the House and Senate, and that alone just wouldn't ever happen.
Yeah.